By means of shrewd lies, unremittingly repeated, it is possible to make people believe heaven is hell and hell heaven. The greater the lie, the more readily it is believed. What luck for rulers that men do not think. Adolf Hitler. Joseph McCarthy created a conflict between the government and America's constitutional rights by erroneously accusing Americans of being communist or having to do with the Communist Party. Edward R. Murrow decided to expose McCarthy's unjustified actions to the American people to try to discredit him. By 1942, the Communist Party in America increased by 50,000 members. Communism was thought of as a way to combat fascism. However, after World War II, the Soviet expansion frightened the United States. By the 1950s, America had changed its mind and was now scared of communism. The Soviets have successfully tested their bombs and were stockpiling weapons. Communists were gaining control of Eastern Europe, China, and Southeast Asia. At the same time, the Cold War had begun, and this arose great fear for American politicians. This fear of communists was known as the Red Scare, since the communists were commonly referred to as Reds. An unknown junior senator from Wisconsin named Joseph McCarthy took advantage of this fear to base his campaign. He earned his law degree in 1935 and then opened a law office in Waukesha, Wisconsin. He later took a position at a law firm in Shawano. Then, in 1936, ran for district attorney in the Democratic ticket but did not win. In 1939, he became a judge after defeating a judge who had served for 24 years. In 1942, he left the position to become a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps and was placed in the Pacific during World War II. He was involved in mostly bombing runs. Once he returned from World War II, he pursued nomination for the Senate in the Republican Party, but failed. A year later, he regained his office and previous position as a judge. In 1946, he formed the plan to run for a seat in the Senate and base his campaign on the fear of communism. He won the Republican nomination and general election and was sent to Washington, D.C. After his beginning years in the Senate, he began his accusations against the innocent people. Edward R. Murrow was a renowned reporter that attacked McCarthy through television. Murrow's career took off at the Battle of Britain in 1939. He was a reporter for CBS that had been sent with a group of correspondents to report on the German Blitz of Great Britain. He became very known during his stay in London. At his return to America, he was a star and began hosting a television show called See It Now. This name arose from a previous radio show Murrow had done called Hear It Now. He reported stories on common American people. However, they were presented in a manner that these stories were viewed as commentaries on social and political issues. He also constantly promoted ideals like free speech, citizen participation, preservation of rights and freedoms, and most importantly, the pursuit of truth. His devotion for truth caused McCarthy to be preferred target for him. He also very much believed that there were no possible compromise with McCarthy since his actions were unjustified and eccentric. McCarthy used the fear for communism to base his campaign. He claimed to have a list including the names of people involved in communist actions. Most of these people were government workers. Besides this list, McCarthy also unfairly interrogated civilians on communist relations. Those that were blamed were forced out of their jobs. Many Americans began to worry about being called communist or being related to one. McCarthy's actions became harsher and harder to believe every time. McCarthy eventually got full permission to investigate civilians. After making several accusations against innocent people, he made his next attack on the army, claiming that there were communist sympathizers working within it. This was the turning point against McCarthy. Then Murrow began his hits against McCarthy, since now was a time when he was most vulnerable. Murrow immediately began including McCarthy in his show discussions.
The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad, and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear, he merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
He also presented many cases about people who McCarthy had ruined their lives by inaccurately accusing them. He did a very famous show about Murrow and Joseph, a weather officer in the Air Force who had been discharged because he was considered a security risk with no evidence. Also, his sister and father had been accused of being communist sympathizers.
And looking down, and even after I was reinstated, I still said to myself, well, this is something else. There's something else they're going to nail me with. They nailed me with a blood relationship, which is absolutely, it's not only un-American, it's unhuman.
Murrow used him as an example to show that McCarthy was unconstitutional. 1 month later, Radulovich was reinstated to his job. Soon the American public began to question McCarthy's accusations. Murrow decided to do a half-hour show about McCarthy and his tactics, even though it would cause Murrow to be accused by the senator himself. CBS gave McCarthy a separate half-hour prime time to review Murrow's accusations.
For the record, let's consider briefly some of the senator's charges. He claimed, but offered no proof, that I had been a member of the industrial workers of the world. That is false. I was never a member of the IWW, never applied for membership.
After both shows, the American public had seen enough. Murrow's show had showed the truth. However, McCarthy's show had proven he was merely accusing people with no cause. On December 2, 1954, McCarthy was censored for his inappropriate Senate conduct. 3 years later, he died at age 48. Murrow showed the American people that McCarthy created a conflict where none existed. He made them understand that they should not compromise their constitutional rights.